Okay, hi everyone. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for carving out time today to focus on your financial wellness. You'll see a prompt on the screen. What's one financial decision you've been putting off or wrestling with lately? If you're like most people in your 50s or 60s, you probably have a handful of big decisions on your mind: when to retire, whether to help adult children, how to manage your ESOP shares, or just whether you're on track. These are not easy calls, and you are absolutely in the right place. Today's session is all about helping you feel more confident prioritizing those decisions and understanding the trade offs. No fire hosing of information, no sales pitch, just a practical framework to help you think clearly and plan forward. We've got a great session ahead. Go ahead and get settled. Maybe grab a glass of water, open a notebook, or just take a deep breath. You're doing something today that future you will thank you for.
Welcome, everyone, to today's session, Conflicting Goals, How to Prioritize Competing Financial Needs. We've just come off January, the New Year's resolution month, and whether or not you kept all your resolutions, I know I half kept one and sort of kept another one. Many of us have some questions or tension in our lives. Competing priorities may be pulling at us, deciding whether we should retire and when, whether we should help kids or grandkids, or how to manage a windfall from your ESOP. If you're in your 50s or 60s, thinking about balancing what's coming up with what's realistic, you're definitely in the right place. As Carmen mentioned, we invited folks to share in the chat what's one financial decision you've been putting off or wrestling with lately.
Yeah, the chat's still a bit quiet now. I think we're going to inspire them. But we know that all of our participants are here for the same reason, the conflicting goals and how to solve these problems. Let's get to it. How can we help?
You've already heard their voices. Now let's put a face to the names. Dezarae Jackson joins us from Amsted Industries, where she leads employee engagement and corporate giving. Peter Newman is the founder of Peak Wealth Planning and a CFA charter holder with decades of experience in helping families navigate financial decisions. They'll both be sharing insights today based on real conversations they've had and the most common questions they hear from people wrestling with decisions like retirement, legacy, and helping their kids.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm Peter Newman. I have 2.5 decades of managing investments, both institutionally and 13 years advising retirees with Peak Wealth Planning. Our team are experts in helping families align their goals with their financial realities, including generating tax-efficient retirement income. Looking back over the last decade in particular, some of the most common questions I get from folks thinking about retirement are: when can I actually retire? Should I diversify my company stock? And can I afford to help my children?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dezarae Jackson at Amsted Industries. My role is the Senior Manager of Compensation and Benefits. I spend the majority of my time knee deep in ESOP transactions as we are a quarterly ESOP, which always keeps things exciting. In my role, I guide employee owners and help them understand the total rewards. I assist in making that connection between ESOP, retirement, real life goals. And also, I spend a lot of time making complex benefits clear and actionable as I often get to the hourly employee level and chat with people to help them plan. In my tenure, the majority of my questions are around the ESOP. Where do I even start? Is my ESOP in my 401k? What can I get it now? Can I borrow? That's a popular one. And I also from newer employees get questions about how the ESOP can help as they if newer generally don't understand what ESOPs are. But I enjoy helping people get a grasp on their future, and ESOPs are at the core of it. So what you'll learn from us today, we'll share some insights into the most common financial conflicts that people face in their 50s and 60s. We will offer practical framework to help you evaluate and prioritize these competing goals. And that will help you to get a better understanding of how planning brings clarity, confidence, and most importantly, control of your future. Chat, what does ESOP stand for? It's an employee stock ownership plan. That's companies that are owned by the employees.
Yeah, to add on what Desiree said, if you're not an ESOP participant, this session is still definitely germane to you, just that several of our participants happen to work in employee-owned companies. But the decisions and the frameworks we're going to talk about certainly apply to anyone planning their financial future. Be sure to stick around till the end. You'll hear about a mini one-on-one retirement planning session that might be on offer following this webinar, so you might want to hang around to hear about that. Being a fiduciary, I need to remind everyone that even though Desiree and I are going to walk through some case studies, this certainly is not individual investment, tax, legal, or even relationship advice. Please make sure to consult with your own financial advisor, attorney, or CPA. And be sure to consult your spouse to keep everyone happy.
You can afford anything, but not everything. This quote brings me to a point where I remember the first time I gave my children like a $5 bill, and they walked into a store in the toy aisle, and their eyes got big, and they at that moment was like, I want all of this, right? And there's also that crushing moment where they realize that $5 won't afford everything. It's very different when you're making a decision with $5 as opposed to a million or multi-million dollar portfolio for retirement. All of these challenges present themselves.
And we have on the screen here, we popped up several questions that Desiree and myself as wealth managers get from families. Should I take Social Security early? Should I delay for more money in the future? Do I self-insure for certain types of insurance, or do I purchase the insurance policy? Do I keep working full time, or do I downshift to part time? Should I remodel the house, or do I need to save more money for healthcare? I keep reading about this healthcare issue in retirement. Do I pay off my mortgage or keep investing? And these decisions can be a bit overwhelming. In my personal experience, even when it comes to making our own family financial decisions, such as getting wills done and deciding who we should name as trustee and power of attorney, it took my spouse and I a lot of mental energy and several conversations over 6 to 8 months to fully complete an estate plan. There is a hidden cost of indecision. I mentioned on the slide previously, there are lots of decisions. Sometimes that can lead to this overload, and then it becomes this emotional load almost. You're out with friends and you're at brunch, and someone says, "Oh, I just did X, Y, and Z in my financial life and did this thing with my mortgage." And maybe your partner or spouse looks at you and you're like, "Oh, I didn't get on that yet." So there can be this second guessing or this a little bit of anxiety around it. Also, not having a clear plan, and Desiree and I will talk a little bit about some strategies on how you can have a clear plan, but not having a clear plan can lead to reactive decisions that you're making maybe hurriedly without being really thoughtful, or there can actually be costly delays to not planning.
So I like to spend time presenting with you, but I also try to apply these things to myself to make them real. What happens if I don't have a will or a beneficiary to my IRA? Um,
Good
what?
question.
Yeah.
Good question. And folks we work with, we routinely remind people to update their beneficiaries for their 401k and their IRA. And not having a will is certainly a challenge. I'll talk about both of those. If you don't have a will, your friends, charities you care about, anyone who's not a blood relationship probably isn't going to get any money from your estate. So if there are charities you care about or family, friends that you want to help take care of, having a will is really important. Secondly, the state that you live in has a plan for your assets, even if you don't have a will. They will follow the law in that state and divide up your assets among your family members. And that may or may not be consistent with what you and your spouse wanted for those assets. Further, not having a will can lead to very costly delays. There's a process called probate that exposes your assets to creditors and may even create infighting among family members. So it can be months and a lot of money not having a will. That's just one example of inaction. You also asked about beneficiaries. If
Mhm.
you have a beneficiary on an IRA or a 401k or an employee stock ownership plan listed, and heaven forbid someone passes away, that transfer to the beneficiary is pretty efficient. There's not a big delay. It doesn't have to go through probate process. But if you don't have someone listed, it gets dumped into the estate and goes through the state process, whatever state you're in, and there can be significant delays. And again, the money might not go where you would have intended because there was no beneficiary form.
It also sounds expensive. Um,
It can be quite expensive, particularly depending on certain states. Yeah.
and my role, I'm often presented with questions about what to do when they get their ESOP, when they can pull out their shares or start collecting on their retirement savings. As a financial planner, do you often see a hidden cost in people failing to have discussions or make the decision to talk about like maybe converting like deferred tax wealth into Roth if this is a process that takes years or um, do you see a hidden cost in that?
I'm happy you brought that up. There's really three types of investment accounts, those that are taxable. So a regular stock account, maybe you inherited some stock from some relatives. And if you don't sell the stock, it just grows in value. You don't pay tax till you actually sell the stock. But you might have a little bit of dividend income. Maybe you own some Coca-Cola stock. It pays a little bit of dividend. And every year you pay a tiny bit of tax on the dividend. But really, the large gain isn't taxed till you sell out of that account. So that's a taxable account. Most folks working at companies, not all, but most folks working at companies have a 401k plan or some type of ESOP plan, like we talked about earlier. Usually those accounts are tax deferred. What that means is when you put money in and your employer puts money in, you don't pay tax on the funds that go in there today. That's true of ESOPs as well as the majority of 401k accounts. Those monies grow, hopefully quite significantly over time. And when you get to a certain age and you retire, you pull out money and it's treated as regular income, just like your paycheck. The government, if you don't rely on those funds, especially early in retirement, the government has a plan to help you empty those accounts starting at age 73 or age 75, depending on what year you're born. And many folks are caught off guard at how large those withdrawals can be when they hit that age 73 or 75. So, what are folks to do? There is an account called a Roth account where you can put money in to the Roth, whether you've put it in yourself under certain guidelines each year, or you can take your pre-tax 401k or IRA, and it's called a conversion, and you can take some money out of your 401k or take some money out of your ESOP that was in an IRA and you can move it to a Roth and you pay a little bit of tax today. Why would someone want to pay tax today that they don't have to? There are some forecasts that financial planners do, that some accountants do, where they'll look at maybe you retire at 62, they'll look at the 11 years between 62 and 73, and they'll say, you know what, Desiree, if you take $50,000 a year out of this ESOP account that was moved to an IRA and you move it to a Roth, across your lifetime, that will save you, and I'm making up a number, $150,000 in federal tax. So there are hidden advantages to Roth conversions, and most folks need some guidance in how to execute those and when to time them. And there are different tax brackets you look at. We look at as financial advisors, the 22 or the 24% tax bracket, maybe not the highest tax bracket, which is 37 or 39%, but we'll do Roth conversions strategically and work with clients and their CPAs. So the long story short is by doing projections, by looking at where your money is, not just how it's invested, but what type of tax account it's treated, we can potentially save folks lifetime tax bills. I've seen a range from it doesn't make sense to do Roth conversions to it could save you ten to $100,000. I've seen some clients that have fairly significant ESOP balances where it could literally save them $1 million or $2 million. So
Wow.
doing the exercise is pretty significant.
Wow. Thank you for that. So let's clarify and prioritize what matters. When we're facing these decisions, you that will take you to the next step of defining your vision. What do you want your life to look like in 5 to 10 years? And no, that's not an interview question. That's a true question that you should answer yourself for yourself. Um, Next, you have to truly identify your values. What is the most important to you?
Desiree, I'm glad you brought this up. When we work with families, we typically provide them with a questionnaire and ask them about their goals. And if the family is willing, we'll have a vision and values discussion with them. We'll typically start with values. What's most important to you? Is it supporting your church and the community around the church because it's nurturing and helps take care of the community? And then how does that translate into your mission? For example, do you want to carve out time to spend time helping the church as part one of your retirement? I'll call it part-time. It's not a job, but a part-time activity in retirement. And then there's a vision exercise. What do you envision your life to be like 10 years from now? So some people, I'll give you a different example, that might be, hey, I've always wanted to own a flower shop. And Desiree and I talked about this in a presentation we did a few years ago. There was a gentleman who worked at an employee-owned company and he wanted to start Bill's Flower Shop. And that was his vision. So we worked to try to clarify that vision and figure out how he could align his Bill's finances with that vision. When your decisions that you make reflect your values, you gain clarity and confidence in your actions going forward.
Absolutely. If you value quality time with your family and your vision is to spend time with your family out in nature in the summer, the action may be save a little more for retirement and set aside funds to rent or purchase a home near a national park, right? Your value is accomplishment and your vision, that floral shop in a small town, or your action might be set aside funds to launch that dream. The key point here is what you value most will drive where you direct your dollars.
I like that statement. When it comes to making decisions, there's a three lens framework that we can apply to making those decisions. The first lens is urgency. Does this require immediate action? The second lens is impact. How much does this decision affect my life today or my lifestyle and my future retirement income, whether it's 5 or 10 years from now? What's the magnitude? And then alignment, does this decision support my long-term plan or personal vision? So an example of misalignment might be, I really want to spend time in nature and I'm saving up money for this vacation home near the mountains. And I'm doing a little bit every year and I'm putting that away and putting some money away. And the goal's 10 or 15 years from now, but I've worked with my advisor and I'm setting money away. And then my neighbor shows up in a brand new sports car, those darn sports cars, right? Or pick your exciting thing that your neighbor shows up with. So you have to ask yourself, okay, well, Jim got a sports car. I think I might want a sports car, but let me go back and think about, is it urgent for me to have a sports car today? What's the impact if I get a sports car today? Does that affect Today I might be really happy, but does that align with my long-term plan or personal vision? And by the way, it doesn't mean you can't buy a sports car. It just means revisit what you wrote down and thought about. One of the other things I'll say is this decision-making framework. The reason I'm bringing it up is in my business, we'll often see folks that are aware they need to make the decisions, but I see a lot of procrastination. And if it's not urgent, it gets, but it might be high impact. It just gets set aside.
Yeah. I really like this decision making framework, and I like how I feel like it overlaps or overlays the previous three steps we took with urgency. How does this really affect my mission? And then I'm looking at that impact. Well, how does that affect my vision? It's the same guy looking out in the future, right? And alignment, everything I do should align with my values. And I like how they overlap there. They seem to fit perfectly together.
I think that's a really good observation, Desiree.
So let's get into our first case study. Should we diversify our company stock now, or wait to see if it grows? Well, I'm gonna do my best to apply your framework, but first, I'm plugging your employee owners and companies. Empower yourselves. You should always have access to your plan summary. Those are generally long reads. So you should also always have access to your summary plan document or summary plan description that'll speak more in layman's terms and explain your plan so you understand how diversifications could impact you and how they work for your organization. So into our case study, we have David and Amy. They have about 70% of their nest egg in company stock. They're facing a diversification question at age 55. Of course, the conflict, should we diversify or let it grow? Um, the first step for them would be to clarify what's most important. And for this couple, peace of mind and reducing risk are high on the list. So next, it's time to run the numbers to actually forecast and see. We like to make educated decisions. We don't guess over here. So we run the numbers, and forecast shows their RIF shows they're already close to their income goal, but they're heavily concentrated in that company stock. Now let's apply those three lenses, the urgency. They're eligible to diversify now. The opportunity comes again in 12 months. So they have some flexibility there. The impact, well, a downturn in stock, it could truly delay their retirement goals. But alignment, on the alignment side of the house, diversifying actually supports their long-term decision or their long-term design or goals of stability and flexibility. This would ultimately reduce risk and line nice with their goals. So what should they do?
So, to clarify one thing for folks that are not employee stock ownership plan participants, diversification means you can go to your employee stock ownership plan HR department, fill out a form, and say, hey, I'm making up a number here, $2 million of company stock. I'm 55 and I've been here more than 10 years, and I'd like to sell back a quarter of my stock, $500,000. And then the form will say I can direct that money to, and in this case, in our example with David and Amy, they chose to diversify a quarter of their money that was in one single company stock that's done quite well into an IRA account. And that's called a rollover. And here, because David and Amy's retirement income forecast said they're on track to retire with the wealth they've built, they decided to invest their money a little bit conservatively, a mix of stocks and bonds in this IRA account. So by doing this diversification, they gain control over those monies that were in the single stock, and they potentially reduce their risk of not being able to meet their retirement timeline.
It sounds to me like gaining clarity actually gave them confidence, which is a big win when we're talking about finances.
I'm glad you brought that up. By doing the forecast and saying, okay, well, we can meet our goal with what we have saved and we can stick with our plan, that does get that clarity. And then that gives you confidence in the decision, do I diversify or not? You're not second guessing, which is really important.
Absolutely. Well, coming this spring, a little birdie told me you might be spending some time digging into diversifications or whether to hold employee stock or hold stock in general.
We are planning a webinar tentatively right now on May 6th, 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and it will be a deeper dive into ESOP diversification and retirement income planning. The folks who attended this today will receive our emails about that in the future for sure. This is a common question that I see in the work that we do with families. A very common question, should we pay off our mortgage or stay invested? So Carlos and Lisa, our case example here, a wealth balance of $1.5 million in company stock. They have saved $450,000 in their 401k accounts, and they're about 15 years into a 25-year mortgage, and the remaining mortgage principal balance is $140,000, and their financing rate is 3.25%, so a pretty low interest rate. Carlos's parents passed away, and they received some cash, $180,000 windfall, and they're trying to decide what to do with these funds. We had a conversation with Carlos and Lisa because we worked with them for several years. So we check in periodically a couple times a year. And we know that Carlos and Lisa have very little cash savings because they've worked very hard to put money into their 401k. Having a discussion with Carlos and Lisa, we know that they're open to a little bit of aggressive investing with the extra cash they inherited and could potentially earn 7% using this windfall. It's important to note that Carlos and Lisa both have fairly secure jobs, and they're about 52 years old, and they would like to, they don't have to, but they would like to retire early if it's possible. That's been one of the planning discussions we've had with Carlos and Lisa.
So practice makes perfect. I would love to, can I practice here with the framework? Okay, here we go. Clarify what's most important. Well, for Carlos and Lisa, financial freedom and retirement flexibility ended up at the top of their list. So time to run the numbers. Paying off the mortgage would reduce fixed costs, but they would lose liquidity. And I would say their retirement forecast shows that they're underfunded by about 120K if they really want to retire by 62. So with that information, if I go through to apply these lenses, urgency, well, that APR, that's kind of low. I would keep it. Paying it off now really would just reduce their investment growth opportunities. And when we consider alignment, if their long-term goal is truly to retire early, and I add in the fact that they're a little bit underfunded, they are not aligned if they were to pay off their mortgage. I'm going to take a guess and say they should keep the mortgage, but get rid of that deficit and invest. What would you say? You're the expert.
I think Dezarae did a great job applying the framework. I'll add a little bit of additional color. Most of the mortgage payment, because they're in the last 10 years of a 25-year mortgage, is going to principal anyway and very little to interest. And Lisa and Carlos, their monthly cash flow, even though they didn't have a lot of emergency savings, allows them to do the things they want to do, and they're not stressed with their current mortgage payments. And their mortgage, the 10 years remaining on the mortgage, actually pays off right about the time they were thinking about early retirement anyway. So they decided to keep the low interest mortgage and invest the $180,000 for future retirement income as well as having some emergency savings and are forecasting if they got about a 7% return, which would involve some stock investing, that $180,000 could potentially give them roughly another $1,000 a month in retirement income. So not an insignificant amount of added retirement income by investing. Plus their mortgage will pay off in retirement. That will free up what we call imputed income of an additional roughly $1,000 a month for their mortgage payment.
We love that for them. So, other common questions. A couple of these. Should I pay for my kids' grad school or save more in the chat? I see children's weddings. Can I retire at 62? I see in the chat when to retire. Should I keep my life insurance post-retirement? What about paying off kids' credit card debt? Um, these are all great questions that honestly now I feel I could apply the framework, apply that process to see if it's urgent and would impact my dream. But what are some uncommon questions that you think we should chat about? One that once I learned, I can't get it out of my head. Long-term care.
Interesting you brought that up. We have done a lot of work in the last few years with long-term care, especially given the rising cost of care around the home by professional certified nurses assistants, as well as rising medical costs. So we have a case study here, Liz and Paul, they're age 55, and they have actually gotten some initial quotes for some long-term care policies. Liz and Paul, in my discussions with them, their top values include peace of mind and reducing risk. They're not big risk takers. We did some forecasting and looked at the typical cost of, we assume maybe one of them was in an assisted living facility home for a couple of years, needing some help with getting dressed and feeding themselves. Nothing we're all super excited about, but something everyone should plan for. Two-thirds of people need some type of help with these activities when they get older, at least for a period of time. But our forecast shows that Liz and Paul, from their nest egg, could cover some long-term care for the first 2 years. However, and this is not uncommon when we do forecasting, if Liz and Paul needed 6 years or more of long-term care, that could potentially hurt the other spouse's lifestyle because it would drain a lot of the nest egg and remove those funds available for day-to-day living, time with the grandkids, those sorts of issues. And what we typically see if we apply the three lens framework, urgency, Liz and Paul are shopping long-term care policies today at 55, but the premiums on long-term care typically ratchet up pretty significantly to buy that insurance after age 59 or 60, around that age. The impact, as I mentioned, an extended long-term care stay. I'm aware of a client whose grandmother needed 12 years of care. She had Alzheimer's. So if Liz or Paul had an extended long-term care stay, that could really hurt their surviving spouse's lifestyle, maybe drain their nest egg more than they wanted. And if Liz and Paul wanted to leave a legacy for their children and grandchildren, that could also impact the ability to do that. Alignment, when we worked with Liz and Paul, we got some quotes for long-term care insurance premiums. They are not cheap. The policy Liz and Paul looked at were about $7,500 a year. That sounds like a huge number, but that's a 10-year fixed payment for each of them. So a $15,000 a year investment for each of them over 10 years. However, on day one, that policy has almost $400,000 of long-term care coverage. And if those policies inflation adjust, so a $75,000 investment over 10 years, at age 85, that's more than $1 million roughly of long-term care coverage. So those are big premiums. Not everyone wants to invest the funds on that, but it's something that we do price and look at for couples that come to us and ask about long-term care. And there are other ways to finance long-term care. Insurance is not the only way. You can use your assets, or you can rely on a state-run Medicaid facility. It's important to note that Medicare does not cover long-term care.
Mm.
Um, in our example, Liz and Paul did run the numbers, and they elected to purchase the long-term care insurance, even though $15,000 a year is a lot of money. They were willing to pay those fixed premiums over a 10-year period and be finished with paying up that policy.
So I'm adding the 2026 lens here. What happens if their grandchildren become content creators, move them onto the estate? They don't have to worry about this stuff. There's people to pay for everything. What happens to that investment?
That's an excellent question. Many of the long-term care policies today are also fully paid up life insurance policies. So in my example, if Liz invests $7,500 a year for 10 years and she's paid in $75,000, if her grandchildren have her on the estate and she never spends any money on long-term care, if she passes away, her kids or grandchildren or whoever she named as a beneficiary, and this is a rough number, but would inherit a life insurance policy of $120,000. So it's
Okay,
kind of like a return of premium if you never use the long-term care. And that is a little bit more attractive to people than policies where you just pay and pay and pay, and if you never use it, you've lost the premiums, so to speak.
nice. So, how to stay clear, focused, and on track? Well, the number one job that you will have is to write down your goals. That will anchor your decision truly in what matters most. Again, that run those numbers. Like I said, we make educated decisions. We don't guess. Running the numbers will eliminate the guesswork, and it will show you what's actually possible. You should also create checkpoints. This will keep your progress aligned with changing priorities, and those checkpoints may look different depending on the space you are, how close you are to retirement. It might be an annual checkup. It might be something you're doing quarterly as you're moving close to the big day where you get to sleep in. And finally, I would always recommend getting an accountability partner, whether that is a child that manages things for you, your partner, whether you need to hire one, a financial planner, someone like Peter, that will help you continue to strive for your goals by keeping you accountable.
At Peak Wealth Planning, some of the areas that we help families is goal setting and follow through. We're often told that we're like a personal coach for people's finances or a personal trainer. We've also been compared to the architect and a builder of a house. We do like to work with folks to clarify values, to have conversations so their plan reflects what matters most to them, not only today, but in the future. And it's super exciting for us to see when we work with families and to track progress. I ran into someone at an event last summer that had been a client many years ago. We had done some financial planning with them, and she said to me, "My daughter started college." And I was amazed when we got the 529 accounts and we had put the money aside that you said you should put aside, and the markets, stock markets and investment markets did over that time what we reasonably thought they would. She's like, I had the amount of money you said I'd have like 10, 12 years ago. And it's like, well, yeah, that's forecasting. It's how it works. And good progress and steady progress actually can lead to these positive outcomes. And one of the other things we try to do is, and you saw this with our three lens framework, is simplify decisions and help folks highlight smart trade-offs. Someone asked in the chat about a wedding, and I think, a family could use that three lens framework to say, how much can I afford to spend on a wedding, right? For example, how high of an impact if I spend a certain amount of money on a wedding is it to my other financial goals? And how aligned is this wedding with my values, right? A big family with lots of connections might be really important to have a wedding, and you might be okay with some different financial trade-offs to put a big investment in a wedding. Other families might have a very different view on that. We're giving the kids $5,000 or $10,000 and we're going to let them elope, and they're on their own. So really, that three lens framework I think can be applied in a lot of areas. If you would like to know if you're truly ready to retire, we do have a mini retirement income forecast that you'll receive an email about following this event. And you'll be able to see how much your retirement income might be able to generate and spot if there's any gaps in what your savings and help you identify, particularly for folks 50 or over, what retirement timeline and whether they're on track. This would be extremely helpful for ESOP participants too. And that forecast will be $199, and that money can be applied to our full financial planning package if folks are interested. So that offer is exclusively for folks attending this webinar today, and we'll send out some information about that afterwards.
Now, before we open the floor to questions, I see one that I would like to hear your opinion on. What questions should people ask in preparation as to if they're ready to retire or when to retire?
That's an excellent question. At a very high level, I think there's two components to retirement. One is how you're going to spend your time, right? A lot of us are focused on the financial side, but I think it's really important. That's why Dezarae and I talked about mission, vision, and values is many of us spend a lot of our energy and identity at work, right? And it may or may not be who we are completely, but does take up a big chunk of our time. So maybe really thinking about how might I spend my time, what activities or hobbies or family activities I do today, or community or church activities I do today, and how will that evolve when I retire? So one is thinking about that. So are you activity-wise, psychologically, mentally prepared for retirement? So that's the one piece. The second component, I believe, for retirement is how are my finances set up, right? What sources of retirement income will I have? Is it Social Security? Is it regular withdrawals from my IRA account or my ESOP that I moved to my IRA, my 401k? Maybe my spouse has a pension. So really just getting all your finances organized and then looking at how much I'm making today. Most people, not everyone, most people spend the same amount of money in retirement that they do while they're working. There's just this, I'll call it a myth, that people spend 20% less. At least the first few years of retirement, I don't typically see that. I see people mostly spending what they spent before they retired. But get your finances organized, do some financial projections. Be sure when you do those projections to not only look at the total amount you can get from your accounts, but what your after-tax amount is, because there is a tax bite. So doing a forecast and then looking at, can I replace my income or the money I need? And the other big question is there anything that's going to change dramatically when I retire? For example, are there any expenses that go away? Did my mortgage get paid off? Maybe I don't have to spend the money I did on clothing, right? That's a smaller money amount than paying off the mortgage, but what changes for you? So I think those are the two sides of it, is the mentally and activity prepared, and then the am I financially prepared? Good
Okay.
question.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. With that, do we have any other questions? Anything that is burning on your mind you would like to ask?
And
If not, I hope this was helpful.
And I would like to thank Dezarae Jackson for my co-presenter and Carmen Egoff from our team that helped put this together. After this webinar, you'll receive our typical emails where you can subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already. And we do have a website specifically for ESOP participants in addition to our Peak Wealth Planning website. It's a new website we've put up, www.myesoppplanner.com. Feel free to check it out and email us your thoughts, and it's directly germane to ESOP participants. And thank you everyone for attending today. We're grateful for your time and we wish you a happy, healthy, and prosperous 2026.
Absolutely. Have fun making decisions, you guys.
Take care, everyone.